"We don't want you around the baby," Brianna said. No hesitation, no softness, just those 7 words, each one delivered like it was an item on a grocery list. She didn't blink, she didn't fidget, just stood there, rocking Jameson in her arms like I hadn't just been exiled from my grandson's life. I remember blinking twice, as if my ears needed help processing what my heart refused to accept. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. No cartoons in the background, no cooing sounds, just the hum of their overpriced air purifier. I had come over to drop off a bag of hand-sewn bibs and a pot of lentil soup. Nothing dramatic. Just a soft gesture, a grandmother's way of showing she still cared, even from a distance. "I'm sorry," I said. Brianna adjusted the baby slightly, like my confusion was a bother, not a wound. "It's just too much for us right now. You being around, the energy, the pressure, the noise." The noise? I had never considered myself noisy. I didn't call too often. I never showed up unannounced. I hadn't even held Jameson since he was born. Not once. And yet, somehow, I had become too much for a house that wouldn't exist without me. Behind her, I saw the entryway table, the one I helped them pick out when they moved in. The little ceramic dish for keys I'd brought from Portugal. A picture of the 3 of them, framed, curated, complete. "No room for a 4th. "I see," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. Aaron wasn't home." Of course he wasn't. He was never around when the hard things had to be said. He used to be sensitive. The kind of boy who cried when he scraped his knee and apologized when he broke my mixing bowl. But somewhere between the promotions and the podcast recommendations, he turned into someone who let his wife speak for both of them, especially when it came to me. I set the soup down on the counter gently. The plastic lid clicked against the granite. "I'll let myself out," I said. Brianna didn't respond. Outside, the afternoon sun had started to dim, just enough to paint the sidewalk in long shadows. I walked slowly back to my car, unsure whether to be angry or simply hollow. The bag of bibs felt heavy in my hands, heavier than it had any right to. I placed them on the passenger seat, then sat with my hands on the wheel, staring out the windshield for a full minute. She said it like I was some kind of threat. I whispered to no one. That morning, I had ironed my blouse, took the time to curl the ends of my hair, wore the earrings Aaron gave me for my 60th. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd be invited to sit with the baby, not for long, just enough to say hello. I remember walking through Target a week earlier, holding a pair of tiny infant socks between my fingers, trying not to cry. They were blue with little white clouds stitched on top. I didn't buy them. I wasn't sure if they'd go unreturned like the rest. I had been excited when they announced the pregnancy, so thrilled in fact, that I opened a trust account the same week they told me. I didn't say a word to them then, just thought of it as a future gift, something I could offer quietly, a generational handoff. That's what I told my lawyer. Set it up with their child as the beneficiary. Not them. I'd already seen what entitlement looked like in this new generation. I wasn't naive, but still, I hadn't expected this. I drove home with my windows down, letting the wind slap away the sting in my eyes. I didn't want to cry. Not over this, not over. Back in my kitchen, I set the bibs down on the table and opened the soup for myself. The smell, familiar and warm, did nothing to dull the ache in my chest. I poured a bowl and forced myself to eat 3 spoonfuls before pushing it away. It tasted like goodbye. I walked to the hallway and stood in front of the mirror. She said I was too much. I looked at my reflection, long gray hair, tired eyes, a soft beige blouse buttoned to the collar. Not a threat, not even close, just a woman trying to stay relevant in a family that was shrinking around her, shrinking to fit a version of life that had no use for its elders, unless they came with gifts and silence. I sat on the edge of the bed and reached for the baby book I kept in my nightstand drawer. It wasn't Jameson's. It was Aaron's. Pages filled with scribbles, photos of his first bath, locks of baby hair tucked into envelopes, notes about his first tooth. I had raised him, with everything I had, through his father's chemo, through layoffs, through nights I went without food so he could have enough for school lunch. And now his wife was the gatekeeper, and the gate had closed. I held the book to my chest, letting it press against my ribs, wondering how long it would take for him to realize what he'd done, what he'd allowed. The doorbell rang. I didn't answer it. I didn't move. It rang again, once, then silence. I eventually checked the peephole. It was a delivery guy. He left a box at the step, a gift basket. The note said, "Thanks for stopping by. Hope you understand. Rest up, Bree and Aaron." Inside the box, tea, some lavender lotion, and a paperback titled "Finding Peace in Distance." I almost laughed. Instead, I carried it all to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in. The lotion bottle hit the bottom with a dull thud. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine and the trust fund documents in front of me. My name, their son's name, a future I had tried to build before I even saw his face. And now, I wondered if he would ever know mine. For the next 3 days, the house stayed still. No phone calls. No texts. Not even one of those generic, thinking of you check-ins. Aaron used to send when he felt guilty but didn't want to say why. The lavender lotion sat in the bottom of the trash, cracked open, leaking across the cardboard of the gift basket. I didn't fish it out. I left the baby bibs folded on the kitchen chair like a vigil. Maybe I hoped seeing them would soften me, remind me why I cared in the first place. But by the 4th morning, I covered them with a dish towel. I couldn't stand the way they looked at me. On the 5th day, I went into the garage and pulled out the storage bin marked Trust Fund, Jameson. It was a plastic box I'd packed with printed bank statements, notarized forms, copies of correspondence with the attorney who helped me set it all up. When I first created it, it felt like hope sealed in legal language. Back then, I'd told myself I was preparing a legacy, a jumpstart into college or a first apartment. Something that said, "You were wanted before you were even born." Now I wasn't so sure. I took the bin into the living room and began organizing everything again, more for myself than any purpose. The papers felt heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just more tired. I hadn't been sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. "We don't want you around the baby." 7 words, soft as snow, sharp as bone. I poured tea and sat at the table, reading each form again slowly. I was the primary trustee, Aaron was secondary. Jameson was the beneficiary. Brianna wasn't listed anywhere formally, but then I found the amendment page. 6 months ago. Signed electronically by me. Co-trustee privileges extended to Brianna. It was neatly worded. Looked harmless at a glance. I remembered the phone call now. Aaron, asking casually if they could make things simpler, since Brianna would be managing most of the baby's early needs. I'd been at the garden center, distracted, half listening. I said yes. He emailed the link that night. And just like that, I handed her power. I stared at the signature block. My name. Clicked to sign. I wanted to scream, not just at him or her, but at myself, for being so eager to stay included that I didn't even read the fine print. For believing foolishly that kindness was its own kind of protection. It wasn't. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The wind was sharp, trees shedding, gutters full of crisp brown leaves. I passed a house with a stroller parked outside and felt a twist in my stomach. A young mother opened the door, laughing into her phone. Her baby gurgled in her arms. They looked like something from a commercial, a life I thought I was about to be part of. Instead, I was the threat to be kept away. Back at home, I opened a bottle of wine and poured myself exactly 1 inch. I didn't want to drink. I wanted to remember, to sit with it, to feel the weight of everything I had swallowed for the sake of family, the swallowed opinions, the bitten tongue, the gifts given in silence, the forgiveness offered too early, too often. My phone lit up. A text from Aaron. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Everything okay?" I stared at it. Typed, "Everything's fine. Thanks for asking." Deleted it. Typed, "Actually, not really. But you already know that." Deleted that too. In the end, I sent nothing. Instead, I opened a fresh folder on my desktop. Titled it, "Legacy, Revised." Then I picked up the phone, not to call him, but to call the one person who never looked at me like I was a burden, Carla. She used to work with me at the high school. We weren't close, but she was sharp. She'd helped her mother untangle a mess of probate documents 2 years ago. She once told me, "A signature without awareness is theft waiting for a deadline." I found her number and dialed. "Hello? It's me. I said. A pause. Then, "Hey, you okay?" "Not really. I need help understanding some legal language." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Bring wine. I'll bring highlighters." I packed the papers into a neat folder, threw on a sweater, and drove across town. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and printer ink. She didn't hug me when I walked in, just gestured to the table. "Let's see what they tried to slide past you." 2 hours later, she had gone through every page. "Well," she said, setting down her pen, "it's not irreversible, but they definitely played you." "Legally?" I asked. "Not fraud. But ethically?" She shook her head. "It's like they took your nameplate off your own desk and handed it to someone else." I pressed my palms to the table. "They didn't even do it for the money." She looked up. "That's what makes it worse. When I left her place, it had started to rain. Soft at first, then steady. I didn't mind. Let it soak through my sleeves, let it hide the heat behind my eyes. I drove home without music, without thought. I had planned a life of quiet giving. Now, I was planning something else entirely. I didn't answer the next time Aaron called. He rang twice on Saturday morning, left a voicemail that sounded rushed, almost like he wanted it on record, but didn't want to say too much. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Bray's a little worried you didn't respond to the gift basket. Not sure if something came across the wrong way. We really appreciate everything you've done. We're just, adjusting. Let's talk soon. Okay?" No apology, just a breadcrumb of concern, wrapped in PR language, the kind people use when they're not sure if they're being recorded. I replayed it once, then saved it. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to remember the tone, the hesitancy, the cowardice. That afternoon, I walked into town. I didn't need anything, but I stopped by the stationery shop and bought a new notebook. Hardcover, navy blue, gold trim. I wrote my name inside the front cover and titled the first page, "What I Will Not Forget." I started with Brianna's sentence. Wrote it slowly, letter by letter, like carving it into stone. "We don't want you around the baby." Then I listed everything that came after. The soup in the trash, the cracked bottle of lotion, the voicemail without an apology, the amended trust agreement, the signature I gave without reading. The last line I wrote in bold, all caps. What they called a misunderstanding was a strategy. I set the notebook down and stared out the window. A little girl across the street was walking a wobbly toddler by the hand. They were both laughing, bundled in mismatched coats. The sight made my chest ache. I once held Aaron's hand like that. Every step uncertain, but full of trust. I had kept him upright. Who was keeping me upright now? I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out my original will. It hadn't been updated in 6 years. Everything, every penny, was set to go to Aaron and his family. There wasn't much beyond the trust, my house, a small pension, and some savings. But it was something, enough, to help, enough, to matter. Until now, I didn't touch the will just yet, but I placed a yellow sticky note on the front. Review with attorney, no assumptions. The next day, I received a message from Brianna. Text only. "Hey Evelyn, I think maybe there's been some miscommunication. Just wanted to say thank you again for the soup. So thoughtful, and the bibs, super cute. I hope we can clear the air soon. Let us know when you'd like to visit again." No mention of the phrase. No acknowledgement. Just sweet frosting over a spoiled cake. I didn't reply. Instead, I went for another walk. This time to the old church where I used to volunteer. The community garden behind it was mostly dead now. Winter wilt, but the benches were still there. I sat on one and pulled out my notebook. Scribbled another list. Never invited to hold him. Told to stay away. Let us know when you'd like to visit again. I looked around at the empty beds of soil, wondering if anything would bloom again in that space come spring. Some things did, some didn't. Sometimes the rot was too deep. On the way back, I saw my neighbor Linda in her yard, trimming back her lemon tree. She waved. I walked over. "You look like someone who needs cake," she said. I didn't argue. We sat on her porch with mismatched mugs of tea and slices of lemon pound cake that still steamed. I told her everything, not all at once, not dramatically, just piece by piece, like setting down puzzle tiles no one wanted to finish. Linda didn't gasp, didn't offer cliches. She just listened, nodded, and said, "They know exactly what they're doing." "That's what scares me," I said. "Then scare them back," she replied. Her tone wasn't bitter, just factual. "They expect silence," she added. "Give them consequence instead." I smiled, for the first time in days. Not because of revenge, but because someone else saw it. Saw me. Before I left, she handed me a plastic tub of extra cake and said, "Don't waste energy fixing people who sleep well after hurting you." When I got home, I opened my laptop and found my original email thread with the attorney who'd helped me set up the trust. Her name was Marlene. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years. I typed, "Hi Marlene. I hope this message finds you well. I need to discuss some changes to the trust we created for Jameson Carter. Please let me know your availability this week for a call. Best, Evelyn Harp." I hovered over the send button for a long time. Then I clicked it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like I had shifted a stone in my chest that had been sitting there too long. That night, I found an old photograph in the back of my closet, me holding newborn Aaron still in my hospital gown, with a tired but real smile on my face. I was 29, broke, widowed, and terrified, but I had loved him with everything I had. And now I was done giving that kind of love to people who couldn't hold it with care. Marlene called me back the next morning, sharp, polite, efficient, just like I remembered. "Evelyn," she said, "I reviewed the original documents and the amendment file. You're still the primary trustee. If you want to dissolve or restructure the fund, you're well within your rights." I let that sink in. I'd spent days letting guilt gnaw at me, like I was the one in the wrong. But here it was, plain and clear. I still held the— "I don't want to remove Jameson," I said. "He's just a baby. He hasn't done anything wrong." "Understood. I just don't want them to control it anymore." Marlene was quiet for a second. Then, "That can be arranged." We scheduled an in-person meeting for Friday. She recommended I bring any correspondence, texts, emails, anything relevant to the change of structure. I thanked her and hung up. Then I pulled out the shoebox I had labeled peace offering, the one I'd been stuffing with printed screenshots, voicemail transcriptions, and all the ways silence had replaced honesty. I spent the next hour at the kitchen table, sorting everything into neat piles. My fingers trembled sometimes, not from age, but from restraint. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I kept telling myself that I was doing it because legacies weren't just about money. They were about memory, about who gets to hold the story. By noon, I had everything packed into a labeled folder. I slid it into my tote bag and placed it by the door, ready for Friday. That afternoon, I received another text, this time from Aaron. "Hey, Bree thinks maybe things were taken out of context. I'm trying to find a time we can all talk. Maybe dinner? Just us? Let's clear the air." "Clear the air," I muttered. Like smoke doesn't come from fire. I didn't respond. But I did open my notebook. Page 4. What they said when they thought I would stay quiet. I wrote his message down, word for word. That night, I cooked myself a small dinner, roasted sweet potatoes, a piece of salmon, and steamed broccoli. I lit a candle, just one. I made a point to sit down at the dining table instead of eating in front of the television. If they could act like I was disposable, I could remind myself that I wasn't. Halfway through the meal, I thought about calling my sister Rose. She lived 3 states away. We hadn't talked much in the last few years. Nothing dramatic, just distance, life, aging. But she'd always been the first person to call me out when I let people walk over me. I dialed her number on instinct. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Evelyn?" she said, surprised. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then, "I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to say anything until I finish." "Go ahead." And so I told her about the baby, about the hallway, about the sentence, about the trust, about the silence. When I finished, I could hear her breathing on the other end. "Finally," she said, "you always gave that boy too much grace." I thought I was giving him love. Sometimes they look the same, until you realize the only one bleeding is you. I smiled, tight and bitter. "Whatever you decide," Rose said, "make sure it's not just survival. Make sure it's yours." We ended the call without fuss. No crying, no platitudes, just a thread stitched back between us. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Slacks, not jeans, a soft gray blouse, A blazer I hadn't worn since Aaron's rehearsal dinner. I pulled my long gray hair into a low, deliberate twist at the nape of my neck. I looked in the mirror and thought, you are not the extra in someone else's life story. Outside Marlene's office, I paused before going in. The building was new, all glass and chrome, cold, but clean. Inside, a young receptionist greeted me like I was someone who belonged there. I didn't know why that mattered, but it did. Marlene was waiting in a private room. She gestured toward a sleek table. You look composed, she said. I came prepared. We spent an hour walking through the restructuring. She showed me options, placing the funds in a private foundation, changing the trustee privileges, setting a delay on Jameson's access until he turned 25. Do you want them to know? She asked, referring to Aaron and Brianna. I shook my head. Not yet. Not until it's done. I don't want to fight. I want a decision they can't undo. That's smart. Before I left, she handed me a copy of the preliminary restructure for my records. As I slipped the papers into my bag, I felt lighter. Not because I had taken anything away, but because I had finally taken something back. As I stepped out into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A new voicemail. It was Aaron again. His voice was slower this time, measured, careful. Hey Mom, I guess I just wanted to say sorry if things felt cold. We're both sleep-deprived and stretched thin. I know that's not an excuse. Just, I don't know, I love you. I hope you know that. I stood still in the sunlight, the folder pressed tight to my side. He hoped I knew. He didn't say it. Not clearly, not directly, and certainly not when it would have made a difference. I saved the voicemail, just like the others. That night, I went back to my notebook. Page 5, the closest they came to saying sorry. I wrote down every word. The dinner invitation came 2 days later. Aaron called in the afternoon. I didn't pick up, but I listened to the voicemail right away. His voice was almost too careful. Hey Mom, we'd really love to have you over for dinner this Friday. Just the three of us. It'd be good to talk face to face, clear things up. Let's start fresh. I stared at my phone, letting the silence after his message linger longer than the message itself. A start. A fresh one. As if betrayal were a rug stain that could be scrubbed away with an awkward meal and a store-bought dessert. I didn't respond right away. I went to the grocery store instead. Not because I needed food, but because I needed noise. Checkout scanners, distant radio songs, the rustle of carts bumping into each other, something that didn't expect me to smile or nod or answer kindly. I walked the frozen aisle twice before buying a single apple and a box of crackers. Back home, I washed the apple and took a bite. Hard enough to hurt. The bitterness caught me off guard. I checked the skin. It was perfect. I texted Aaron back at 7:03 p.m. I'll come by Friday at 6. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. No emoji. No sign-off. That night, I dreamed I was holding Jameson in my arms. He was older, maybe 4 or 5, and he looked at me and said, "You used to sing to me, right?" I nodded, in the dream, and he smiled, curling into my chest. When I woke up, my arms were empty, and my pillow was damp. Friday arrived colder than expected. A wind had rolled in from the north, sharp and insistent. I chose a thick brown cardigan and a rust-colored scarf. No makeup, no jewelry. I wasn't dressing for their comfort. At 5:55, I pulled into their driveway. The lights inside were warm. Through the front window, I saw Brianna setting the table. 3 plates, no baby items in sight. Jameson was probably down for a nap or tucked away on purpose, hidden, like a fragile secret. The door opened before I could knock. "Hi," Aaron said, like he'd been practicing the word. "Hi," I replied. Inside, the house smelled of roasted chicken and something sweet, maybe honey-glazed carrots. I took in the spotless counters, the dimmed lighting, the curated playlist humming softly through hidden speakers. It felt like a showroom, not a... Brianna appeared in the kitchen archway. She smiled, tight and practiced. "Evelyn," she said, "so glad you could make it." I gave a single nod. "Let's get to it." They led me to the table. I sat down slowly, setting my bag beside my feet. Brianna poured wine without asking if I wanted any. "We just wanted to reconnect," she began, sliding into her seat. "We know things got tense." Aaron leaned forward. Yeah, and we didn't handle things perfectly. We were overwhelmed. Still are. New baby, new responsibilities. It's a lot. I waited. I wanted them to say it. All of it. Brianna glanced at him. He hesitated, then said, about that comment. What Bree said, it came out wrong. I raised an eyebrow. Which part? The part where you said I wasn't welcome around my own grandchild. Brianna's smile twitched. I was trying to protect my peace. I didn't mean it harshly. You didn't mean it kindly either, I replied. Silence sat down next to us, heavier than any of us expected. Aaron sighed. We just needed space. You came by a lot, and things felt crowded. We didn't know how to say it gently. So you said it cruelly. Brianna's hands tightened around her napkin. We didn't want you to feel pushed out. You literally pushed me out, I said quietly. I could feel the words harden as I spoke them. No yelling, no dramatics, just a calm inventory of their cowardice. Aaron tried to pivot. We're trying to fix things now. I took a long sip of the wine, bitter, room temperature, and set the glass down. No, I said. You're trying to manage the consequences. They didn't respond. I let the silence do what it needed to do. Do you even know why I created the trust? I asked finally. Aaron blinked. To help Jameson? To help your family, I said. To plant something I wouldn't live long enough to see bloom. Brianna shifted uncomfortably. And you amended it without telling me. You used your access to grant her co-trustee status. You hid it in routine updates. You signed my legacy away while smiling in my face. I didn't think it would upset you, Aaron muttered. I leaned forward, and that's exactly why you've lost it. He looked up sharply. Lost what? You'll find out soon enough. Dinner sat untouched between us. The carrots began to dry. The chicken lost its steam. Brianna tried one last time. We didn't mean to make you feel excluded, but you did, I replied. And now that you sense the cost, you're trying to sweep it back under the rug. I stood, collected my bag, and wrapped the scarf back around my neck. Thank you for the invitation, I said. I hope the food doesn't go to waste. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in the car. I drove home with the windows cracked, the cold slicing across my cheeks like a benediction. That night, I updated the title of my notebook from What I Will Not Forget to What I Refuse to Inherit. They didn't contact me for 3 days after the dinner. Not a text, not a call. I thought perhaps I had finally said something loud enough to be understood. But on the 4th morning, I found a white envelope propped against my front door. No stamp, no handwriting, no return address, just my name, written in mechanical black ink. Evelyn. I brought it inside and stared at it over a cup of coffee gone cold. I didn't open it right away. Something in me resisted, an old habit, maybe of waiting for the storm to pass before I looked at the damage. When I finally sliced it open with the butter knife, I pulled out a single sheet of paper and a folded brochure. The letter was typed. Evelyn. We're sorry if our choices have made you feel excluded. It was never our intention. We've been thinking a lot about what's best for everyone, especially as Jameson grows and our responsibilities increase. We hope you understand our desire to focus on our nuclear family right now. Please consider this information about Pine Haven. It's peaceful, safe, and could offer you a community where you're truly appreciated and supported. With care, Aaron and Brianna. I unfolded the brochure. Pine Haven, a senior living community about 30 minutes away, tasteful photos, smiling elderly couples playing buckyball and painting watercolor gardens. On the back page, someone had circled the phrase, a place to rest, reconnect, and release what no longer serves you. I laughed out loud, a dry, sharp sound that didn't feel like mine. So that's what I had become to them. Something that no longer served. I sat in the living room for nearly an hour, the brochure limp in my lap, sunlight catching the laminate shine of its pastel cover. There had been a time, not long ago, when Aaron used to call me every week, when he once said, I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom. And now, apparently, the answer was Pine Haven. That evening, I pulled the folding chair onto the front porch. The wind had stilled. The air felt like it was holding something back. I sat there with a blanket around my shoulders and stared at the space between the stars. They wanted peace. That was what Brianna said. They'd have it, but not in the way they expected. The next morning, I made a list. Not a dramatic one, just simple steps. Call Marlene, finalize the restructure, transfer funds to new vehicle, remove Brianna's name from all documentation, draft personal statement for Aaron, not to send, but to understand. I started with Marlene. She answered on the second ring. Good morning, Evelyn. Good morning. Let's finish it. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Within 48 hours, the papers were drafted. A new irrevocable trust in Jameson's name, accessible only after the age of 30, contingent on completion of higher education or verified employment. A panel of 3 unrelated trustees would oversee the funds. Brianna and Aaron were excluded from administrative control. It was airtight, quiet, legal, and devastating. I signed the documents in her office, one after the other, each pen stroke steadier than the last. When it was over, I closed the folder and let my hand rest on it. How does it feel? Marlene asked. Like the lock just turned on a door they didn't know was there. Back home, I placed the new documents in the fireproof safe beneath my bed. I looked around my house. The worn armchair, the book-stacked end tables, the teacups that didn't match, and felt for the first time in weeks something solid return to my chest. I wasn't the one being cut out. I was the one walking away. Later that afternoon, I went outside to water the last of the garden mums. The hose sputtered. The flowers were brittle and tired, curling inward like they'd seen too much frost. I crouched next to them and whispered, "You try." A car slowed in front of my house. I didn't look up at first, but then I heard it park. The door opened. Footsteps approached. Mom? I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my sweater. Aaron stood at the bottom of the porch steps, holding another envelope. His face was pale, shoulders hunched like a child about to confess breaking something valuable. Can we talk? He asked. I think we already did, I said. He swallowed. I just wanted to clarify. The brochure, it wasn't meant to offend, but it did. It was meant as a suggestion. You've been alone since Dad died. We thought maybe you'd like. I held up my hand. Stop. He froze. I don't want to hear your justifications. Not tonight. Not here. He looked down, then held the envelope out. This is some papers from the original trust. We found them in the drawer, thought you might want them. I didn't reach for it. You keep them, I said. A reminder. Of what? Of how quickly peace becomes erasure. His face changed then. Something cracked behind his eyes. Maybe shame, maybe realization, but I didn't press him. You should go, I said gently. Dinner's getting cold. He nodded once, turned, walked back to the car without saying another word. I didn't go inside right away. I stood there in the fading light, the sky bleeding orange at the edges. I could still smell the soil on my fingertips. I whispered to no one in particular. This is not how my story ends. The next morning, I pulled the red folder out from under the bed. It wasn't labeled. I never needed to. There was only ever one. The others were brown or black or navy, full of warranties and tax returns and old family documents. But this one had always been red. Bold, unapologetic. Inside, it was my plan B. I had started the folder years ago, shortly after my husband passed. It held a mix of practical things and private ones, notes to myself, lists of people I trusted, copies of my health directives, even a handwritten version of the lullaby I used to sing to Aaron, and tucked in the back pocket, a single key with a yellow plastic tag. I sat on the floor with it open across my lap and flipped through slowly. There was a letter I'd forgotten I wrote, dated 5 years ago. Addressed to my grandchild. If you're reading this someday. I read it once, then again. It was full of hope. I told Jameson that I had saved something for him, not just money, but memory, that I'd watched the world change and wanted to make sure he had a chance to shape it with more kindness than what he might receive. I wrote about his father when he was small, and how being a mother wasn't a role I ever clocked out of. Back then, I didn't imagine estrangement. I didn't imagine gates between us, guarded by cold smiles and calendars filled with "we're too busy right now." I closed the folder and placed it gently on the table. Then I took out the key. It belonged to a small safety deposit box downtown. I had opened it quietly, years ago, and placed inside a few heirlooms, my husband's pocket watch, a locket with Aaron's baby photo, a single check made out to Jameson Harper, post-dated for his 25th birthday, with conditions attached. I had forgotten the exact amount, but now I remembered the sentiment. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The manager was polite. If a little puzzled at my sudden visit, he led me to the viewing room and handed me the box. Inside, everything was still there, untouched, still smelling faintly of cedar from the lining I'd placed at the bottom. I pulled out the check. It was still valid. The amount was generous, not extravagant, but enough to matter. On the memo line, in my careful handwriting, I had written, "For what you choose to build, not inherit." I smiled. After reviewing everything, I left the check inside and added a note. Updated legal structure filed. See attached contact sheet for trustees. I locked the box again and walked out with a strange new feeling in my chest. Not relief, not triumph, but something sturdier than both. Certainty. On the way home, I stopped by the community center. It was busy, youth classes, seniors in line for flu shots, a girl behind the desk wearing headphones and painting her nails bubblegum pink. She looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like to volunteer." Her brows lifted. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Something quiet, something useful." She smiled, grabbed a clipboard. "We always need help in the literacy room." She walked me down a hallway lined with art made from construction paper and crayon. At the end was a small room with shelves of children's books and a table full of coloring pages. "Twice a week," she said, "just reading, listening, being present." I nodded. "I can do that." Back home, I made soup, from scratch this time, lentils, garlic, rosemary from the windowsill pot that had survived the cold. I poured half into a container and wrote Linda across the lid with a Sharpie. I hadn't forgotten her words. Give them consequence instead. And I had. But I hadn't just removed something from my son. I had returned something to myself. After dinner, I took out my notebook and turned to a blank page. Chapter 2. What I Built Without Them. I wrote for 2 hours, not about pain, or betrayal, or even the trust, but about the way the world looked when I finally stopped asking it to love me back. The humming of the radiator, the sound of rain on my roof, the shape of Jameson's name in my handwriting, still soft, still full of air. Then I closed the notebook and placed it beside the red folder. I was not finished, but I had begun again. It happened by accident. I wasn't meant to see Jameson again so soon. Not after the brochure, the dinner, the folder, and the restructuring that cut them both out of the story they thought they owned. But sometimes, fate rearranges the stage while no one is looking. I was leaving the community center after my second volunteer shift. The afternoon sun was already low, and I had that deep, satisfying kind of tired that comes from doing something with your hands and not your heartache. As I walked toward my car, I heard it. A laugh. A sharp, sudden baby laugh that echoed across the small outdoor courtyard where a few parents sat chatting with coffee cups balanced on strollers. I turned instinctively. You never forget that sound. Not when you've raised a child. That first laugh cuts through you like light through clouds. And there he was, Jameson, on a blanket spread beneath a maple tree, chewing on a plastic ring and giggling at nothing in particular. A woman I didn't recognize, maybe a nanny, sat beside him, looking at her phone. He was chubbier than I remembered. His hair had started to curl at the edges. His cheeks were flushed with life. He didn't see me. I stood very still, my hands frozen around my car keys. I watched for maybe 30 seconds. A minute at most. Then I turned away. Not because it hurt, not because I was unwelcome, but because I realized something. I didn't need to be seen to see him. I didn't need their permission to love him. Back home, I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, tea steeping beside me. I wrote it down in the notebook. I saw him laugh today. I wrote it like a prayer, not desperate, just honest. And I kept writing. He doesn't know what he was laughing at. He doesn't know who wasn't supposed to see. But I saw him, and that was enough. That weekend, I made another change, quiet, but significant. I updated my emergency contacts. Linda was now listed first. Rose, my sister, second. I gave both of them keys. I didn't remove Aaron's name, but I moved it to the bottom. On Monday, I arrived at the community center early. The literacy room was still quiet. The paperbacks untouched. I had brought a new book, Corduroy, a favorite from when Aaron was little. I read it aloud to the empty room first, just to practice. Halfway through, I paused. The sentence read, "I think I've always wanted a home," Corduroy said. I looked around. I had one. Not just with walls and locks, but with people who showed up when you weren't useful to them. That afternoon, one of the younger volunteers, Sophia, invited me to join her for coffee. We walked to the cafe across the street and sat by the window. She was maybe 25, full of opinion and caffeine. "I think what you're doing is so cool," she said between sips. "Volunteering like this. My grandma just kind of gave up after my mom stopped visiting." I smiled, soft and a little sad. It's easy to give up when the people you loved decide you've reached your expiration date. She nodded. "Yeah, but you didn't." I thought about that. "No," I said. "I changed the recipe instead." Sophia laughed. "You've got good one-liners." I shrugged. "You collect a few after 70. We exchanged numbers. I didn't know what would come of it, but it felt good to be asked, not as an obligation, as a person. The following day, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten. No return address, again, but I recognized the loopy A in my son's script. I opened it on the porch. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Or maybe I do, and I'm just afraid to say it wrong again. I know we've made mistakes. I know we hurt you. I don't want Jameson to grow up thinking distance is normal. I understand you're protecting yourself now. I respect it. But if there's ever a way back, if you ever want to hold him again, you don't have to ask. Just come. Love, Aaron." It was too little, but it wasn't nothing. I didn't respond that day. I didn't need to. The notebook was already open on my lap. He said I don't have to ask. And yet, he never did. My birthday came quietly that year. No phone call, no card, no mention. Not from Aaron, not from Brianna, not even a scribbled love you note from the baby's hand with a traced palm and crayon colors like they used to make in preschool. I didn't expect balloons. I didn't even expect warmth. But the absence itself felt calculated, like someone somewhere had crossed a date off a calendar on purpose. That morning, I got dressed anyway. Long brown skirt, cream blouse, my olive green shawl pinned at the shoulder with the brooch my husband gave me on my 40th. I baked a small lemon cake and arranged one candle on top. Just one. Not because I was pretending, but because I still had wishes. At noon, I walked to Linda's house with the cake in a paper box. She opened the door before I knocked, holding a mug of coffee with both hands. "You remembered your own birthday," she said, grinning. "That already makes you better than most people I know." We ate the cake on her porch. She asked if I'd heard from Aaron. I shook my head. She didn't press. Instead, she pulled out 2 paper crowns from a drawer, leftovers from some grandkids' party years ago, and placed one gently on my head. "Let the queen reign," she said. We laughed harder than I'd laughed in months. And yet, when I returned home later that afternoon, the house felt hollow. I opened the red folder again, not for the contents this time, but for the comfort of it, the feel of its weight in my lap, the reminder that I had put things in motion, that I had agency, even if I had no audience. That night, I lit the single candle and made my wish. I didn't wish for reconciliation. I didn't even wish for them to miss me. I wished that one day, Jameson would know the whole story, and that when he did, he'd still want to know me. The next morning, a knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Sophia, the young woman from the community center, standing on the step, holding a reusable tote bag. "I know I missed the actual day," she said, "but I figured birthdays can have aftershocks." She handed me the bag. Inside were 2 books, a small box of tea, and a candle labeled Wilderness and Warmth. "I didn't know what scent you'd like," she said, "so I went with the one that reminded me of how you talk." My throat tightened. "You didn't have to," I said. Exactly why I did. We sat for a while on the porch, drinking tea and watching the world pass by. She asked me what I used to do before retirement, and I told her about teaching, about raising Aaron, about the bookstore I once dreamed of opening but never did. "Why didn't you?" she asked. "Because life steered me elsewhere." "Maybe it's steering you back," she said. "I mean, you basically run the literacy room already." I laughed. "That's a generous exaggeration." "Not really. You make people feel safe when you read. I've watched it happen." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just said thank you. Later, after she left, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Aaron. Not even to Jameson. To myself. Dear Evelyn, you remembered who you were without needing anyone else to say it aloud. You woke up. You dressed. You gave yourself cake. That is no small thing. You lit a candle and wished not for comfort, but for clarity. You are not invisible just because they do not look. You are not erased just because they do not call. You are here, still here. I folded the note and tucked it behind the flap of the red folder. It didn't belong in the trust, but it belonged with the woman who had written it. That night, I went out to the backyard. The moon was full and low. The garden beds were mostly empty now, save for the lavender I'd stubbornly kept alive. I sat on the porch steps and watched the wind stir the stems. Somewhere out there, they were putting Jameson to bed. Maybe singing to him. Maybe not. Maybe he was laughing at nothing again, his world still untouched by the sting of exclusion. I didn't need to be part of the bedtime routine. I just needed to know I hadn't let them take all the softness out of me. The candle Sophia had gifted me flickered beside me, on the porch, its scent curling through the night air like memory. Wilderness and warmth. Exactly what I had become. A week after my birthday, I received a message that changed the rhythm of everything. It came through the community center's volunteer portal. I almost deleted it, thinking it was an automated notice about signups or a background check update. But when I clicked it open, I froze. From Melinda Harper. Subject: I hope this reaches you. Message: I'm Brianna's sister. I know we don't know each other, but I thought you should hear something. I hope it's not too late. Can we talk? I blinked. Melinda. I remembered her vaguely from the wedding. A quieter, softer presence in the background, not much like Brianna at all. She had smiled at me when no one else had. I hesitated for a full hour before responding. Then finally, I typed, Hi Melinda, I'm listening. Evelyn. She replied that evening, asking if I could meet her for coffee the next day. Neutral ground. Her idea. I agreed. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. Quiet, brick walls, and yellow light. I arrived early, as always, and chose a table near the window. I wore my slate gray cardigan and my long brown skirt again, hair loosely braided over my shoulder. When Melinda walked in, she spotted me instantly and gave a small wave. Hi, she said gently. Thank you for coming. We ordered our drinks, mine, black tea, hers, something with froth and cinnamon, and sat down in the corner booth. I don't want to overstep, she said immediately, but I feel like someone should tell you the truth. I said nothing, only nodded. Melinda sighed. Things aren't good between Aaron and Brianna. I didn't say anything earlier because it wasn't my business, but after your birthday passed, and she made a snide comment about how you probably celebrated with your cats, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I winced, but said nothing. She continued, They're struggling, not just with each other, but with the pressure of the image they built. And she's bitter. About the trust, the inheritance, everything. I overheard her once on the phone saying, if the old woman's going to act like a martyr, she better be prepared to die one. My breath caught. She doesn't realize, Melinda said, softer now, that she's turning into someone your grandson will one day run from. I swallowed. Why are you telling me this? Because I think Jameson deserves to know you. And you deserve to know that not everyone in that house thinks you're the villain. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw what Brianna might have been in another life. A version that hadn't chosen ambition over affection. I don't want to force myself into their world, I said. You wouldn't be, she said. You'd just be stepping out of the shadows they tried to push you into. We talked for over an hour, about motherhood, about expectation, about the loneliness of watching someone else raise your grandchild behind a wall built from ego. When we stood to leave, she hugged me. I'll keep in touch, she said. If you'll let me. I will, I whispered. Outside, the wind had picked up. I walked to my car slowly, the weight of the conversation pressing down and lifting me up in equal measure. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, the house still, the candle Sophia had given me flickering low beside my notebook. I flipped to a new page and wrote, I was never the threat. I was the evidence that something real existed before she curated her kingdom. Then I closed the notebook and walked outside, barefoot, into the backyard. The grass was cold and wet. I didn't care. I stood beneath the stars and breathed deeply. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was something like freedom. 3 days after meeting Melinda, I heard another knock on my door. Not a package drop. Not Linda, with a pie. A steady, uncertain rhythm that said the person on the other side wasn't sure they were welcome. I opened it to find Aaron standing on the porch, holding Jameson in his arms. The baby was bundled in a navy jacket with bare ears on the hood. His eyes were bright, alert, tracking everything. Aaron's face, by contrast, looked ashen. His jaw clenched and unclenched like he was chewing something hard and bitter. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. He crossed the threshold like a man walking into a church he didn't believe in but desperately hoped was real. Jameson cooed at the ticking wall clock and reached for the glass bowl on the table. I brought him a wooden spoon instead, and he banged it happily against his leg while Aaron sat on the couch, hands clasped between his knees. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said. "I know what we did. I know we hurt you." I sat in the chair across from him and waited. He looked down at Jameson, then back at me. I didn't see it before, not clearly. I was so caught up in being the man I thought I was supposed to be, providing, being strong, but I wasn't strong, Mom. I was scared. He swallowed. "She told me you'd always forgive, that you'd never actually walk away, and I let myself believe it." I nodded slowly. "You weren't wrong. I used to be that woman." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "But you're not anymore." We sat in silence for a few seconds before Jameson let out a delighted squeal, completely unaware of the invisible walls slowly crumbling around him. Aaron looked at him, then back at me. "Can he stay here with you? Just for a few hours? I need to think." Alone. I didn't ask questions. I simply reached out my arms. Jameson came to me without hesitation, his tiny hands patting my face as if recognizing something he didn't yet have a name for. Aaron stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," I said. "You live differently." He nodded once. "I'm trying." When he left, I didn't rush anything. I didn't make a fuss. I simply laid a blanket on the floor, scattered a few safe toys, and watched Jameson explore the living room like it was the moon. I hummed a lullaby while he played. Not the one I used to sing to Aaron. A new one. For a new child. For a new beginning. When he tired himself out and curled against my lap, I whispered in his ear, "You don't know it yet, little one, but you're surrounded by choices. May you make kinder ones than the generation before you." He blinked slowly, half asleep, and clutched my finger. I sat there for a long time, watching his chest rise and fall. And then, without ceremony, I began to cry. Not from sadness, from release. I had spent so long holding things in, grief, resentment, silence like heavy stones in my coat. And now, in the quiet of this small living room, with a baby asleep on my knees, I finally set them down. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but no longer holding me hostage. By the time Aaron returned 2 hours later, he looked different, not lighter, not resolved, but present. He didn't ask what we did. I didn't offer. He simply took Jameson into his arms and said, "Thank you." I nodded. As they left, Aaron turned and said, "I won't let her keep him from you anymore." I didn't smile. I didn't rejoice. I just said, "That's not a promise to me. That's a promise to him." He understood, and for once, he didn't look away. Later that night, I made a note in the red folder. "Jameson came home today, just for a moment. But sometimes a moment is all you need to start again." 1 week passed, then another. There were no grand reunions, no speeches, no apologies from Brianna, but Aaron kept coming by, sometimes with Jameson, sometimes just himself. He never stayed long. Sometimes he didn't say anything at all. But each visit carried something I hadn't felt in years. Consistency. Then, one afternoon, I checked the mailbox and found something unexpected. A letter, hand-addressed, no return address again, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Brianna's, sharp and deliberate, like she wrote with her jaw clenched. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Aaron. Curiosity wrestled with hesitation. I knew I shouldn't open it, but something told me this wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a private apology. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope unopened in my hands for almost an hour before I made my decision. When I finally slid the letter out, my stomach tightened at the first line. Aaron, if you're choosing her over us, just say it outright. I'm tired of pretending like this charade is noble. She made her bed, let her lie in it. But don't drag us into her martyrdom. My fingers trembled. Do you know what people say about us now? That we're ungrateful? That we're cruel? You should have shut her down months ago. But you didn't. And now you're back there again, bringing Jameson into her little redemption project. You want to raise him with that influence? A woman who weaponizes silence like a saint and money like a punishment? Fine, do it. But don't expect me to stand beside you in that house, smiling while she rewrites history. If you want her, keep her, but don't ask me to pretend. Brianna. I stared at the letter until the ink swam. Then I folded it back up, slid it into a clean envelope, and left it unsealed on the dining table. I placed a sticky note on top. This came to my address by mistake. It's yours. When Aaron arrived that evening, he looked tired again, like he hadn't slept well in days. I handed him the envelope wordlessly. He read it standing, and when he reached the end, his eyes didn't meet mine. She never meant for you to see this. I know, I said, but I did. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know that too. He sank into the chair, folded the letter again, and placed it face down. I didn't know she felt this strongly. Yes, you did, I said gently. You just didn't want to believe it. For a long while, neither of us said anything. Jameson crawled across the floor, fascinated with a ball of yarn I had dropped days ago. She thinks you're rewriting history, he muttered. No, I said. I'm reclaiming mine. He looked up. What does that mean? It means I spent too long letting other people narrate my life, apologizing for my presence, shrinking so others could stretch. He closed his eyes and exhaled. I think I let her do that to me too. We both watched Jameson babble at the yarn, completely unaware that the world around him was cracking open. I'm not asking you to choose, I said, but I am asking you to protect him from that kind of cold. Aaron nodded slowly. I will. That night, after he left, I returned to the red folder and added another page. She thought silence made me dangerous. She was right, but not in the way she feared. My silence is no longer submission. It is choice. It is power restrained, and it is finally mine. I looked around my quiet house. Nothing in it had changed, and yet everything had. I wasn't a guest in this story anymore. I was the author. Winter came slower in the pines than it did in town. The trees held their golds and reds like they were reluctant to let go, and the sky turned silver without ever looking cold. I'd walk the edge of the property most mornings with my scarf tight around my neck, my cane crunching softly in the frost-bitten leaves. Each morning was a ritual: tea, a moment on the porch, and a deep breath before I opened the red folder. It didn't hold just paperwork anymore. I had slipped in notes, Jameson's latest drawing, Linda's cookie recipe, scribbled on a napkin, a photo from Sophia, tucked between legal forms. There was a quote too, handwritten on a scrap of envelope. I did not come this far, only to come this far. That morning, as I sipped my tea, I thought about what I had left behind, and what had never been mine to keep. My family hadn't vanished. They had simply realigned, like stars that shift, still glowing, just not in the same constellation anymore. I had received another letter from Aaron earlier in the week. This one came with more than words. Inside the envelope was a key, a spare to his house, just in case. No promises, no pleas, just a silent gesture that said, "You are wanted here when you want to be." I hadn't used it yet, but it sat on the windowsill, beside my favorite candle, like a welcome that no longer demanded urgency. That afternoon I drove to the bank for the last time. I opened the safety deposit box and removed the check, the one post-dated for Jameson's 25th birthday. I replaced it with something else, a handwritten letter sealed in a red envelope. To Jameson, if I am no longer here when you're ready. Inside it, I wrote about love, about strength that doesn't need to announce itself, about forgiveness that doesn't mean forgetting, and boundaries that aren't barriers, but bridges with gates, ones you decide when and if to open. I left instructions for the trustee: only deliver the letter when he asks about me, not before. Some legacies wait to be inherited, others wait to be understood. On the way home, I stopped by the community center. The literacy room was full, kids scattered across rugs, giggling as Sophia read aloud from a picture book with a terrible pirate accent. She looked up and waved. "You're early. I wanted to listen today," I said, settling into the corner. A little girl with pigtails crawled into my lap halfway through the story. I didn't ask her name. She didn't ask mine. She just rested her head against my chest, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It didn't replace what I had lost, but it reminded me of what I still had to give. That evening, Linda stopped by with a casserole and an envelope. She handed me the latter first. "It's from Melinda," she said. "She asked me to drop it off in case you weren't home." I opened it carefully. Inside was a small note, handwritten in soft cursive. "He asked about you again. Not just in passing." He pointed to a photo and said, "Grandma?" I told him yes. "And that you're real, and kind, and near. We're getting there. Slowly. Thought you'd want to know." I smiled. Not wide, but fully. Before bed that night, I stood in the doorway of my living room, the lamp casting a warm golden light across the rug. The red folder sat open on the table. I walked to it and slid in one final page. They told me I wasn't welcome around the baby, so I took back the trust fund they assumed was their right. And in doing so, I found something better than restoration. I found my place not in their home, but in my own skin again. I closed the folder, and I exhaled. There would be more days ahead, complicated ones, quiet ones, hopefully joyful ones too. But for the first time in a long while, I was ready for all of them, on my terms.